morning of January 24th, 1848, was cold enough to see your breath. James Marshall didn't notice. He was knee-deep in the American River, cursing the tailoress of John Sutter's unfinished sawmill. The water refused to flow right. His hands were numb, his boots full of mud, his patience gone. Then something in the current caught the light. A flake, no larger than a fingernail, glinting with the kind of gold no man forgets. He bent down, picked it up, and felt something shift inside him. Not joy, not greed, but something sharper. Possibility. By nightfall, he was riding hard toward Sutter's fort, the flake wrapped in a handkerchief. He showed it to Sutter under candlelight. Sutter tried to bury the secret, but secrets, especially golden ones, don't stay buried. Within weeks, the whisper spread from the mill to the merchants, to the streets of San Francisco. Sam Brannan, a preacher-turned-salesman, ran through the plaza waving a vial of gold dust and shouting, "Gold! Gold from the American River!" He already bought every shovel in town. He knew what Marshall didn't. The gold wasn't the product. The promise was. And so, the world began to move. From Boston to Guangdong, men sold their tools, pawned their land, deserted their posts. They weren't chasing gold. They were chasing what gold meant. That a lifetime of bad luck could be erased in a season. That fate could be rewritten with a single stroke of the pen. By August, California's valleys were tents and fever dreams. By year's end, President James Polk confirmed the rumors. The gold was real. The old order, he thought, was blessed. He didn't realize he'd just lit a fuse. That fuse crossed oceans. A letter, stained and trembling, arrived in a Chinese village. The Golden Mountain is real. A man can earn in 1 month what his father earned in a lifetime. Only a poor farmer. Read those words and made a decision that would echo through generations. Across the Pacific in Chile, a miner named Francisco kissed his sleeping daughter and left before dawn, chasing a vision of nuggets lying like fruit in the riverbeds. In Cornwall, a tin miner sold his father's watch to buy a ticket. In Veracruz, a Mexican soldier walked out of his barracks and into a myth. Each believed they were escaping poverty, but what they were really doing was reshaping the world's geography, one shovel stroke at a time. The human tide that followed didn't move as one. It moved in millions of private acts of departure, each leaving behind a life and inventing a new one. When the first ships anchored in San Francisco Bay, the men saw a city that looked like a shipwreck. Canvas tents, stolen planks, mud deep enough to swallow boots whole, streets named after bars and brothels. Yet it worked, because every man who came off the ship needed the same 3 things: a place to sleep, a place to drink, and a place to feel, for one brief night, that he hadn't been a fool. And in that chaos, a new kind of genius thrived. Sam Brannan sold shovels instead of swinging them. He mapped the contours of greed and built a city of belief. San Francisco wasn't planned. It was invented. The fever spread like a contagion that didn't respect borders. Melbourne, 1851, mud, tents, cold, and a harbor so full of abandoned ships that you could walk across the bay without getting your feet wet. Johannesburg, 1886, gold locked in rock instead of rivers, a new game played by engineers and financiers instead of dreamers. Dawson City, 1896, frozen tents on the edge of the world, where a dance cost a nugget and the price of an egg could break a man. Each of these cities rose from nothing but belief. They weren't built on gold. They were built on the idea of gold. Streets traced in sweat and blood, corners marked by bones. The map of the modern world began not with rulers or empires, but with footsteps in the mud. But every map has its shadows. For Maria, a Miwok woman, the gold rush meant the end of her world. The miners poisoned her river with mercury, dammed her streams, trampled her acorn groves. Her children grew sick. The land where her ancestors had been buried became mineral land on paper she'd never seen. The new map was not drawn in ink. It was drawn in loss. A miner named Henry thought he was a good man. He didn't know the mercury in his pan would poison generations. In the Sierra Nevada, another miner lay dying in a collapsed shaft, the flake of gold that had doomed him pressed against his hip. The map was being redrawn, but the new borders were measured in bodies. By 1852, 4 out of 5 indigenous people in California were gone, erased by law, by hunger, by the slow violence of removal. The official maps showed progress. Maria's map showed graves. The two versions of the world never overlapped. And yet, the fever burned on. August 1896. The Yukon River. A Tagish man named Quiche, called Skookum Jim by others, found a nugget no bigger than a pea. His brother-in-law, George Carmack, raced to file the claim, understanding what few indigenous discoverers could. Gold without a flag was just a rock. Gold with a flag was sovereignty. 8 months later, the world caught fire again. The Klondike Gold Rush headlines arrived in New York and London, and the same fever that once built San Francisco now threatened to redraw the border between Alaska and Canada. Both nations rushed soldiers, surveyors, and lawyers north, not to find gold, but to own the right to tax it. The Americans claimed it. The Canadians fortified it. The real map of the Klondike was written not by miners, but by ministers in Ottawa and Washington. The tribunal in London made the final cut. The Klondike would remain Canadian. Another border, another scar. Now the globe spins again to South Africa, 1886. The Witwatersrand, a land of scrub and cattle, thought worthless until an Australian prospector found gold embedded in stone. The British saw more than metal. They saw leverage. The Boer farmers saw invasion. What followed, the Jameson Raid, the Boer War, was not about ideals. It was about longitude and latitude, about who could claim the reef beneath the veldt. When it ended, 75,000 were dead, 28,000 civilians starved in camps, and the gold flowed east to London. Every gold rush begins as discovery and ends as empire. The gold is never the true prize. The UMAPA is. And nowhere was that clearer than in the American West. By 1869, as 2 locomotives faced each other at Promontory, Utah, the telegraph flashed one word across the country: A-Done. Newspapers called it the joining of a nation. In truth, it was the completion of a circuit, a closed loop between gold, land, and power. And the Transcontinental Railroad wasn't built to unite America. It was built to extract it. Funded by California gold and government land grants, it turned the landscape into currency. For the Big Four, Stanford, Crocker, Huntington, Hopkins, it was a machine that printed wealth in steel and debt. 10,000 Chinese laborers blasted the line through granite, hanging in wicker baskets over canyons, paid less and buried more often. One of them, Lim, wrote home, "Lithe, mountain is hungry. It eats men. But the rails must reach Sacramento, because the gold is there. His words outlasted his body. When the golden spike was driven, his name was nowhere to be found. The photograph showed only men in top hats. But the true triumph was invisible. The birth of a new empire, one that conquered not by muskets, but by movement. By the time William Ralston opened the Bank of California, gold had transformed into something more elusive. Credited. He didn't dig. He dreamed. He sold shares in the idea of mines, mapped futures out of speculation, and made paper wealth more powerful than metal ever was. San Francisco became a temple to belief, not production. The gold under the ground mattered less than the numbers on the page. Across the world, others learned the same trick. In Melbourne, Thomas Haynes printed dreams instead of digging for them, selling guides, maps, and phantom claims. In Colorado, William Russell built a mail route that didn't exist, selling stock in the idea of connection. They were not conmen. They were architects of faith. Each understood the same truth, that the dream of tomorrow is worth more than the reality of today. And that's the real alchemy of gold rushes, not the metal, but the transformation of belief into currency, of ambition into architecture. From California's rivers to South Africa's reefs, from Yukon ice to Nevada's dust, every glittering strike redrew the lines of nations, rewired economies, and reprogrammed the human imagination. When Marshall picked up that flake in the river, he didn't just find gold. He found the switch that would turn the age of empires into the age of speculation, the frontier into the marketplace, and the map into a mirror of human desire. The rushes ended. The fever cooled. But the pattern never left us. We still chase new frontiers, digital gold, financial gold, the next El Dorado. We still redraw the map every time we believe the future lies just one more dig away. And maybe that's the quiet lesson buried beneath all the glitter. Gold was never about wealth. It was about time. Every man who chased it believed he could buy back the years he'd lost. Every empire that claimed it believed it could outlast history itself. But time is the one frontier that cannot be mined, measured, or owned. It slips through our fingers, soft and bright, like a flake of sunlight in the shallows.